Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Carl sent me a note, said, "Hey Steve, I saw a video on YouTube you might find interesting about the history of the center line in the middle of the road." Now, I'm an attorney. I often talk about cars and traffic and history, but I'm also a historian. That's why I talk about history. And so I said, Carl, it's interesting because I wrote an article about that 4 years ago. So, here's the thing. If you are interested in this, I think you'll find this interesting. We take everything these days for granted, and it's easy to take the things around you for granted without thinking that, hey, there was a time, for instance, when like cars didn't have windshield wipers, right? Or anti-lock brakes, or an electric starter that you could actually start the car with from inside the car. So the idea is the center line of the road. Where did that come from? Somebody had to go, hey, I think we should draw a dotted line down the middle of the road so that people can stay on their side of the road. What a novel concept. It was a novel concept at one point in time. So the man who invented the dotted line in the middle of the road also has been called the man who invented the most important single traffic safety device. And I'm using that quote. I know it's a little awkward. I don't even understand why they said it that way. But the interesting thing is that there's also a debate and a controversy over this, although we generally agree on it, those of us who've done the research. And like I said, I wrote my article 4 years ago. So I will put a link to my original article below. It ran on Opposite Lock, which is a sub-blog of Jalopnik. As of right now, it's still online, although I've heard rumors that some of that Opposite Lock stuff might disappear. I did save everything I wrote for Opposite Lock and Jalopnik. Somewhere down the road, I might actually publish that as a book. The only problem is that I wrote about so many different topics that the book wouldn't actually make a lot of sense in a linear fashion. But as a series of collected essays, it might. I just don't know how much interest there'd be in that. But the question I ask of you is, what would be the most important single traffic safety device? And many people say it was the line down the middle of the road, the center line. And it was invented by Edward Hines, H-I-N-E-S, Hines of Michigan in 1911. And for Michiganians, you'll know there's a Hines Park in Wayne County, Michigan. It is named after Edward Hines. So here we go. Edward Hines was the Wayne County Road Commissioner in 1911, and it was his idea to paint the white line down the middle of the road. Now, he at one point said that he was inspired by seeing a leaky milk truck driving along, leaving a nice dotted line down the road, and that led him to the idea of dividing the road into halves, when viewed this way, so that cars could avoid hitting each other as they approached each other. So the line down the middle of the road may be the most important single traffic safety device. There's others out there, stop signs maybe, I don't know. But this, of course, was not his only claim to fame. Like I said, they've named things after him like Hines Park. But he's also credited with the first mile of concrete roadway, which was a section of Woodward Avenue between 6 and 7 mile roads. There is a debate on that one as to where the first mile of concrete roadway was ever built. I know there's people in Ohio who claim it's there. And I've seen historical markers in other parts of the state about really, really old pieces of concrete. And so I'm not going to get into that today. But I'm talking about the center line in the road in 1911. Now, I personally think that the leaky milk truck is an apocryphal story, meaning that it's a story that he made up because it was fun to tell, but it probably wasn't true. In earlier versions of Hines' story, he said he witnessed a near head-on collision on a bridge between a horse and buggy, and an automobile. Okay, so horse and buggy coming one way, automobile coming the other way. They almost collided, and he said that that was what scared him and made him think about this. But he told this story in 1953. So this was 42 years after he'd done it, and he told that to the Milwaukee Journal. And neither of those vehicles was obviously a leaky milk wagon, at least not according to him. He said that he saw the near miss and thought a center line might help. So he ordered his road commission to begin center striping all danger spots at first, which was curves and bridges. Curves, of course, because people can't hold their side going around a curve. And, of course, a bridge, because quite often the road narrows at a bridge, and so people often go down the middle of a bridge instead of going down their side. I can tell you right now, you'll encounter a very similar situation if you're going down, like, say, a dirt road that's crowned and it's icy and ugly out because, dirt roads don't have the center line. And if it's crowned and icy, people want to drive towards the middle. And I actually have one road in particular I can think of near me that I go down when I go get my mail at the P.O. box. And it's a dirt road with a real severe crown. And I was on it last year, and I had a car coming towards me, and I'm going this way, and I'm in my Explorer. And as I start going the side, I noticed I started drifting with gravity. So I had to kind of like get back up and hold the line as best I could, which is also a song by Toto. So after people were raving about how much they enjoyed having the dotted lines and the curves and the bridges, he then ordered the rest of the roads in Wayne County that could be striped to be striped. So after they did that, many people saw the results and began center lining their roads as well. And so Wayne County, which is the county that Edward Hines was the road commissioner for, became the leader in this and became the poster child for, hey, everyone should do this. So it spread across the state and around the nation as a result. Now, here's the thing. I love finding those things in history that are mistakes and correcting them. And I've actually, as a personal result of work I've done, I've gotten historical markers changed. I've talked about that before. So there is a dispute about this in Michigan because a historical marker in northern Michigan, hundreds of miles from Wayne County, actually is titled Highway Centerline Invented Here. And the historical marker is just wrong. But their marker says that their local road commissioner, Kenneth Sawyer, who, by the way, has an Air Force base named after him up there, or a former Air Force base, says how he invented the center line when he painted a line on a nearby dangerous curve in 1917. So Sawyer supporters argued that their center line was the first center line, even though they admitted it was painted in 1917, and Hines had already ordered Wayne County centerlined in 1911. So I point out in my article that 1911 does in fact precede 1917. That's how numbers work. The Sawyer supporters then began saying that Sawyer was the inventor of the first rural center line, which makes no sense at all because, number one, portions of Wayne County are rural and had been centerlined 6 years earlier. So there are some recent articles in papers, and I pointed out that the Daily Mining Journal, for instance, wrote an article in 2011 talking about how the Sawyer marker language is correct because the centerline painted stripe has been adopted worldwide to guide drivers to keep their own lane, and that the Sawyer line somehow inspired other people to do this, which is nonsense. The writer of that piece used the word rural, but the weird thing is that the marker actually doesn't say rural. So it's a very, very strange thing. So Sawyer's rural center line in 1917 was nowhere near a first, even if we split hairs on what rural means versus urban, because Oregon, among others, had adopted center lines by 1917 as well, the whole state. According to Oregonian, February 26, 1958, center lines had been painted there as early as April of 1917, although their center lines were yellow and not white. The question, of course, does the color matter? The 1958 piece was actually talking about the color of the lines, not who was first, which in my mind gives it more authority. And there's one more obvious point, and that is prior to 1917, major portions of Wayne County were rural. So, the lines in Wayne County in 1911 were already in rural parts of the country in Wayne County. So Wikipedia states that Sawyer's rural centerline first notion is correct, or at least it did when I wrote this article. But Wikipedia is often riddled with inaccuracies. The state of Michigan even grants Sawyer the first rural centerline. But I believe that personally is because they hate to call out locals on their historical markers. Took me 5 years to get the historical marker at the Italian Hall disaster site changed. So, no one's saying that Sawyer wasn't a good guy. And I don't even know if Sawyer himself claimed to have invented it. But it's just the locals really want to have that local hero and so. By the way, and I pointed this out in my article, B.F. Goodrich, the tire company that does not have a blimp, decided to figure out who deserved the credit for the center line back in the 1930s. And Goodrich concluded that the honor belonged to Heinz. The St. Petersburg Times called him the originator of center safety stripe for highways and noted his recent recognition by the tire company. AAA even gave him a bronze plaque. And his bronze plaque predated Sawyer's mistaken historical marker by a decade or two. So, next time you're struggling to stay on your side of the center line, thank Edward Heinz. Is the center line the most important traffic safety device of all time? A strong argument can be made for it, but if not, what other contenders might there be? I asked that question on Jalopnik 5 years ago. So there you go. The man who invented the center line, or center stripe, was, of course, Heinz, the road commissioner of Wayne County, Michigan in 1911. I find it fascinating. Hope you do too. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching Lehto's Law. And no, I'm not a robot.